What if I told you that your relationship with weed and spirituality has been completely backwards from the beginning? That everything you've been taught about cannabis, whether it's medicine or menace, sacred or sinful, has missed the most profound truth of all. Cannabis isn't what you think it is. It's not a substance you consume. It's a test you either pass or fail. And most people are failing it spectacularly. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will completely revolutionize how you understand this ancient plant and your spiritual journey. You're about to discover why your cannabis experiences have felt inconsistent, why sometimes you feel expanded and other times anxious, why the same plant that promises enlightenment can leave you feeling more confused than ever. But here's what's absolutely fascinating. Every uncomfortable experience, every moment of paranoia, every time you felt too high wasn't the plant failing you. It was the plant doing exactly what it was designed to do. You see, for thousands of years, cannabis wasn't rolled into joints and smoked while scrolling through meaningless content. It wasn't sold in dispensaries with cartoon mascots and marketed like weekend entertainment. Ancient shamans, mystics, and spiritual seekers understood something we've completely forgotten. This plant doesn't give you anything. It reveals everything. And that revelation, that mirror it holds up to your soul, is either going to transform you or terrify you. There's no middle ground. And here's where most people get it completely wrong. They approach cannabis like it's supposed to make them feel better, like it's a mood enhancer, or a stress reliever, or a spiritual shortcut to enlightenment. But cannabis doesn't care about your comfort. It cares about your truth. When you light up expecting peace and instead get confronted with your unprocessed grief, your swallowed anger, your deepest fears, that's not a bad trip. That's the plant working perfectly. But before I reveal what this means for your spiritual evolution, you need to understand something that will completely shift your perspective. The anxiety, the paranoia, the overwhelming sensations you might experience. These aren't side effects. They're direct communications from your expanded consciousness trying to show you exactly where your spiritual development needs attention. And here's where it gets incredibly profound. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Those buried aspects of your psyche that you've rejected, forgotten, or never dared to examine. And cannabis is one of the most effective shadow-revealing substances on the planet. But here's what makes this absolutely extraordinary. Your ability to handle that revelation, to sit with the discomfort and extract the wisdom. That's not weakness. That's spiritual strength of the highest order. Think about this for a moment. While others are using cannabis to escape reality, you're being called into deeper reality. While they're numbing their senses, yours are being amplified. While they're avoiding their inner world, you're being invited to explore territories most people will never have the courage to enter. This isn't happening because you're broken. This is happening because you're spiritually gifted. And this gift comes with a responsibility that most people never recognize. When cannabis makes you uncomfortable, it's not rejecting you, it's preparing you. In the same way that a master swordsmith heats metal to its breaking point to forge the strongest blade, your challenging experiences with cannabis are forging something unbreakable within your consciousness. Every moment you've chosen to breathe through anxiety instead of running from it, every instance where you've faced your fears instead of numbing them, you've been developing what ancient traditions call spiritual fortitude. But wait until you hear what the ancient traditions knew about this process. In India, cannabis was offered to Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation. Notice that? Destruction and transformation. His devotees, the sadhus, didn't smoke for recreational pleasure. They smoked to die, at least to the ego. The plant was a sacrament of dissolution, a tool for obliterating everything false so that something true could emerge. They understood that weed and spirituality weren't about feeling good. They were about becoming real. The Sadhu tradition reveals something crucial about conscious cannabis use that modern culture has completely abandoned. These spiritual practitioners would spend months or even years preparing their bodies, minds, and energy fields before ever approaching the plant. They practiced fasting to purify their physical system, meditation to stabilize their mental awareness, and pranayama breathing techniques to regulate their energetic body. The cannabis wasn't the spiritual practice, it was the graduation ceremony after the real work had been completed. And this is where everything changes. What if your most challenging cannabis experiences weren't mistakes but initiations? What if every moment of anxiety was your consciousness expanding beyond its comfort zone? What if every paranoid thought was actually your intuition becoming hyperactive, picking up on energies and truths you normally can't perceive? What if the plant has been trying to initiate you into a deeper level of spiritual awareness, but you've been interpreting the initiation as a malfunction? Here's what the research reveals about people like you. Neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer discovered that individuals who experience anxiety with cannabis often have heightened default mode network activity, the brain region associated with self-reflection and introspection. In other words, your brain is naturally wired for deeper self-examination. The plant isn't creating problems, it's amplifying your existing capacity for spiritual insight. But the research goes even deeper than this. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College London found that psychoactive substances don't add new capabilities to consciousness. They remove the filters that normally constrain it. When you feel overwhelmed by cannabis, you're not experiencing mental dysfunction. You're experiencing the temporary removal of psychological barriers that usually protect you from perceiving too much reality all at once. Your consciousness is naturally equipped to handle these expanded states, but it needs training, just like your muscles need conditioning to lift heavier weights. And here's where the story takes an incredible turn. In ancient Taoist alchemy, cannabis was blended with other herbs not to numb the senses but to awaken subtle perception. They understood that the plant made you porous to energetic information most people can't access. Your sensitivity isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. You're literally accessing expanded states of consciousness that require a different level of spiritual preparation to navigate safely. The Taoist masters developed intricate protocols for what they called opening the celestial gates, rituals that prepared practitioners to receive cosmic information without being overwhelmed by it. They understood that consciousness expansion without proper grounding is like trying to pour an ocean through a garden hose. The information is pure and valuable, but the container isn't prepared to receive it safely. This is why they emphasized building what they called spiritual fortitude, the capacity to remain centered and discerning even when perception becomes unlimited. And this is what modern culture completely stripped away, the preparation. For thousands of years, cannabis was never consumed casually. There was fasting, meditation, prayer, energetic cleansing, community support, and skilled guides who understood the territory you were entering. The ritual wasn't superstition, it was spiritual technology designed to create a safe container for consciousness expansion. Think about the difference between how ancient cultures approached this plant versus how we encounter it today. In traditional African shamanic practices, cannabis use was preceded by days of purification ceremonies, including sweat lodges, herbal cleanses, and community blessings. The plant spirit was invoked with specific chants and offerings, and the experience was held within a sacred circle of elders who could guide participants through any challenging territory that emerged. Every aspect of the ceremony was designed to honor the plant's power while protecting the participants from being overwhelmed by it. Now imagine walking into that expanded state with none of that preparation. No energetic hygiene, no grounding practices, no understanding of what you're encountering. It would be like performing surgery in a dirty room with no anesthesia and wondering why the patient is screaming. The plant isn't the problem. The context is the problem. But here's what's absolutely revolutionary about your experience. Every time you've felt overwhelmed, every moment of paranoia, every instance where you've thought this is too much, you've been receiving direct feedback about your spiritual development needs. The plant has been showing you exactly where your energy field needs strengthening, where your psychological boundaries need reinforcing, where your spiritual practices need deepening. Think of it this way. Cannabis interacts with your subtle body like a tuning fork strikes a musical instrument. If the instrument is in tune, you get beautiful resonance. If it's out of tune, you get discord. But here's the extraordinary part, that discord isn't random noise. It's diagnostic information. It's your energy system telling you exactly what needs attention, what requires healing, what demands integration. In the Hermetic tradition, this diagnostic quality of consciousness expanding substances was well understood. Practitioners would use various plants and minerals not just for their therapeutic effects, but as tools for spiritual assessment. They believed that how you responded to these substances revealed the exact state of your mental, emotional, and energetic development. A master alchemist could look at your reaction to a particular plant and immediately understand which spiritual practices you needed to develop, which psychological patterns required attention, and how ready you were for deeper initiations. And this brings us to the most profound realization of all. Your challenging cannabis experiences haven't been failures. They've been spiritual training sessions. Every time you've sat with anxiety instead of running from it, every moment you've breathed through paranoia instead of panicking, every instance where you've extracted wisdom from discomfort, you've been developing capacities most people never cultivate. You've been learning to navigate expanded consciousness. You've been practicing energy management. You've been developing what esoteric traditions call spiritual discernment, the ability to distinguish between authentic insight and mental noise, between genuine revelation and ego projection. These are advanced spiritual skills that typically take decades of meditation practice to develop. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient mystics always knew. Cannabis doesn't just affect your brain chemistry. It influences your default mode network, your pattern recognition systems, your capacity for non-linear thinking. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris's research on psychedelics reveals that these substances don't add anything to consciousness. They remove the filters that normally constrain it. Recent studies by Dr. Matthew Johnson at Johns Hopkins have shown that individuals who approach consciousness-expanding substances with proper preparation and integration practices show measurable increases in psychological flexibility, emotional regulation, and what researchers call psychological capital, the mental resources needed to navigate challenging life circumstances. In other words, your difficult cannabis experiences haven't been damaging you. They've been strengthening psychological muscles you didn't even know you had. So when you feel like you're losing control with cannabis, you're not actually losing control. You're losing the illusion of control. The plant is stripping away your psychological defenses, your mental barriers, your energetic armor. And underneath all that protection, you're discovering something extraordinary, your authentic spiritual sensitivity. This sensitivity isn't weakness, it's intelligence. It's your consciousness recognizing that it's capable of perceiving far more than your normal waking awareness typically allows. When cannabis makes you feel exposed or vulnerable, it's not creating weakness. It's revealing the courage you already possess to face truth without the comfortable buffers most people use to avoid reality. This is why the Sufi mystics used hashish in ceremonies designed to dissolve the self in divine presence. They understood that the ego's dissolution isn't death, it's revelation. When your normal identity structures temporarily soften, what emerges isn't chaos, it's your essential nature, your true spiritual identity that exists beyond social conditioning, beyond personality patterns, beyond the small self that thinks it needs to control everything. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote extensively about these states of dissolution, describing them as dying before you die, the mystical experience of ego transcendence that reveals your eternal nature. But even Rumi warned about the dangers of seeking these states without proper preparation and guidance. He understood that spiritual experiences without integration could become spiritual entertainment, leaving seekers addicted to transcendent feelings rather than committed to transcendent living. And here's what makes your journey so unique. While others might use cannabis to escape their problems, you're being called to face them. While they seek comfort, you're discovering courage. While they want to feel better, you're learning to see clearer. The plant isn't offering you entertainment, it's offering you transformation. But transformation requires more than just insight. It demands integration. And this is where most people get stuck. They have profound realizations while high, but never anchor those insights into their sober reality. They glimpse their true nature, but don't reorganize their daily life around that truth. They see through the illusion, but continue living as if the illusion were real. Real spiritual development isn't measured by the intensity of your experiences. It's measured by how you apply those experiences to become more loving, more present, more authentic in your everyday interactions. It's about taking the wisdom cannabis reveals and embodying it when you're stuck in traffic, dealing with difficult people, facing mundane challenges. The ancient Rastafarians understood this perfectly. Cannabis wasn't something they consumed privately for personal pleasure. It was integrated into reasoning sessions, community gatherings focused on truth-seeking, wisdom sharing, and collective spiritual evolution. The herb moved clockwise through the circle like sacred energy, and every person became both teacher and student. The experience belonged not to the individual, but to the community. In these reasoning sessions, participants didn't just smoke and feel good. They engaged in deep philosophical discussions about justice, spirituality, social responsibility, and personal growth. The cannabis served as a catalyst for expanding their capacity to perceive truth and speak it courageously. The plant wasn't the destination. It was the vehicle for arriving at greater wisdom and more authentic expression of their divine nature. This reveals something crucial about your spiritual path. The insights cannabis offers aren't meant to isolate you in private mystical experiences. They're meant to enhance your capacity for authentic connection, compassionate service, and conscious contribution to the collective healing our world desperately needs. When you understand this, everything changes about how you relate to challenging cannabis experiences. Instead of seeing anxiety as a problem to avoid, you begin recognizing it as information about areas where your consciousness is ready to expand. Instead of fearing paranoia, you start understanding it as heightened awareness that needs proper direction. Instead of avoiding intensity, you develop the skills to alchemize overwhelming energy into wisdom and compassion. The key is learning what the ancient traditions call spiritual alchemy, the ability to transform any experience, no matter how challenging, into fuel for your evolution. This requires developing several specific capacities that most people never cultivate: emotional resilience, energetic discernment, psychological flexibility, and what mystics call divine indifference, the ability to remain centered regardless of what's happening around or within you. But here's where your journey becomes truly extraordinary. As you develop these capacities, something remarkable happens. You begin to need cannabis less and less to access the states of consciousness it originally revealed. The plant was never meant to be a permanent crutch. It was meant to be a temporary teacher, showing you possibilities that exist within your own awareness. So here's the question that will change everything. Instead of asking, how can I have better cannabis experiences? Start asking, how can I become the kind of person who doesn't need cannabis to access wisdom, presence, and inner peace? Instead of seeking more intense highs, start cultivating the stability to remain conscious without any external supports. Because here's the ultimate truth about weed and spirituality that nobody talks about. The plant isn't trying to become your spiritual teacher forever. It's trying to awaken the spiritual teacher that already exists within you. Every challenging experience, every moment of expansion, every glimpse of your true nature, they're all pointing you back to your own inner wisdom. The ancient traditions knew this. They used cannabis as a temporary doorway, never as a permanent residence. The goal was always to develop the capacity to access expanded consciousness through meditation, breathwork, prayer, and pure intention. The plant was training wheels, not the bicycle itself. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, substances that alter consciousness are sometimes used in very specific circumstances, but always with the understanding that they point toward natural capacities that can be developed through dedicated practice. The real attainment isn't the ability to have extraordinary experiences with substances. It's the ability to access those same states through pure awareness and disciplined cultivation of consciousness. This understanding completely transforms your relationship with cannabis from dependency to gratitude. Instead of needing the plant to feel spiritual, you begin appreciating how it showed you what was already possible within your own awareness. Instead of chasing experiences, you start integrating insights. Instead of seeking escape, you begin embracing reality with the expanded perception the plant helped you discover. And this is where your real spiritual adventure begins. When you realize that every insight you've ever received through cannabis was actually your own consciousness recognizing itself. The clarity wasn't in the plant. The wisdom wasn't in the smoke. The spiritual truth you glimpsed was your eternal nature temporarily revealed, your authentic self momentarily unmasked. You don't need cannabis to be spiritually awake. You need spiritual awakeness to use cannabis consciously. You don't need the plant to access higher states. You need higher states to relate to the plant responsibly. The medicine was never about becoming dependent on external substances. It was about remembering your inherent capacity for transcendence. This realization often comes with a beautiful paradox. The more capable you become of accessing expanded consciousness naturally, the more gracefully you can work with plant medicines when appropriate. When you're not dependent on substances for spiritual access, you can engage with them from a place of curiosity and reverence rather than need and escapism. You become a conscious collaborator with the plant's intelligence rather than a passive consumer of its effects. This is why the most advanced practitioners in every tradition eventually transcend their tools. Not because the tools were wrong, but because they successfully pointed beyond themselves to the source of all wisdom, all peace, all truth, which has always been your own essential nature, your own spiritual core, waiting patiently for you to stop seeking outside yourself and start recognizing what was never actually lost. Your relationship with cannabis has been preparing you for this moment. Every challenging experience strengthened your capacity to remain present with discomfort. Every moment of expansion showed you glimpses of your unlimited nature. Every integration challenge taught you the difference between temporary experience and lasting transformation. The anxiety you felt, that was your consciousness stretching beyond its familiar boundaries. The paranoia, that was your intuition becoming so sensitive it could perceive subtleties normally invisible to waking awareness. The overwhelming sensations, that was your energy body learning to process cosmic information without being destabilized by it. Everything you experienced was spiritual training disguised as recreational drug use. Now you get to choose. Will you continue chasing experiences, or will you start embodying wisdom? Will you keep seeking the sacred in substances, or will you begin recognizing the sacred as the very foundation of your being? Will you remain dependent on external tools for spiritual access, or will you claim your birthright as a consciousness capable of infinite depth, endless love, and unshakable peace? The plant served its purpose. It cracked you open. It showed you what's possible. It revealed your capacity for extraordinary spiritual sensitivity. Now it's time to honor that revelation by becoming the person you glimpsed in those expanded moments, not just when you're high, but as your natural way of being in the world. This doesn't mean you can never work with cannabis again. It means that when you do, you approach it as a conscious spiritual practitioner rather than a recreational user. You bring preparation, intention, integration, and gratitude to the experience. You use it as a tool for service rather than escape, for growth rather than entertainment, for wisdom rather than mere sensation. Because the ultimate teaching of weed and spirituality isn't about the weed at all. It's about recognizing yourself as a spiritual being having a human experience, equipped with everything you need to navigate this reality with wisdom, compassion, and unshakable inner peace. The medicine was never the answer. You are. You always have been. You always will be. The journey from cannabis as crutch to cannabis as occasional conscious collaborator is the journey from spiritual seeking to spiritual being. It's the evolution from needing external validation of your divine nature to embodying that divinity so naturally that others are inspired simply by your presence. This is your invitation to stop chasing enlightenment and start expressing it, to stop seeking the sacred and start being it. Your cannabis experiences were never about the plant. They were about you discovering that you are vast enough to contain any experience, wise enough to extract meaning from any challenge, and powerful enough to transform any difficulty into fuel for your spiritual evolution. Welcome to the real journey. Welcome to yourself.